On this channel, I upload English listening videos for different levels every day. You can improve your English by listening. If you're ready, let's begin. When I accepted the job at the Municipal Analytics Office in Porto, I told myself it was a temporary compromise, a sensible detour on the way to something more meaningful. I had imagined sleek international projects, keynote talks, my name on research papers. Instead, I found myself in a renovated building that still smelled faintly of plaster, surrounded by well-meaning civil servants who called every spreadsheet a system and every setback a learning moment. Yet I stayed, month after month, partly because the city's problems were real and immediate, and partly because I liked the quiet, dangerous feeling of being trusted. By late October, trust had a deadline. The mayor's team announced a bold plan to reduce emergency response times across the city. It was a popular promise in an anxious season. Rising rents, crowded hospitals, the constant background noise of people insisting the city was slipping out of their hands. My unit was asked to produce a forecast. Would a new dispatch algorithm, combined with a smaller fleet of rapid response motorcycles, cut the average response time by 12% within 6 months? 12% was not a number that came from data. It came from speeches. I worked late for 3 nights, feeding the model with 5 years of call logs, traffic patterns, weather data, even the rhythm of football matches that made certain neighborhoods briefly impassable. The results were clear in the way bad news often is. The plan might improve response times by 4 to 6%, depending on funding and compliance. Anything higher required assumptions so optimistic they felt like fiction. On Friday, I presented the findings in the glass meeting room, where you could see the river and the tourist boats drifting like careless punctuation. Luis, the deputy chief of staff, listened with his head tilted, as if my words were an unfamiliar accent. "So," he said when I finished, "your model says the plan won't work." "It says the plan will help," I corrected carefully, "but not at the level being communicated." He smiled, the kind of smile that is meant to soothe and to erase. "Models are tools, Katerina. They don't know the future. We need a narrative that motivates departments to cooperate. If we publish 4%, everyone will shrug. 12% creates momentum. Makes a promise," I said. "Promises are what get budgets approved." His voice softened. "Look, we're not asking you to lie. Adjust the assumptions. Assume full staffing. Assume the training is completed on schedule. Assume improved compliance with traffic corridors. In other words, assume the version of the city we're trying to build." Around the table, people avoided looking at me. It was fatigue. I recognized it because I carried my own version. I had always prided myself on being principled, but I also liked being essential. I liked that my work could tilt decisions. And I knew, with an almost embarrassing clarity, that refusing could turn me into a problem. An idealist who didn't understand politics. An employee who couldn't align with priorities. Luis ended the meeting as if it were settled. "We need the revised forecast by Monday. The press release goes out Tuesday." That evening, I walked home through streets that were already setting up for Christmas lights, though it was barely autumn. The city seemed determined to behave like a postcard, bright and uncomplicated. At a corner cafe, an ambulance screamed past, and the patrons barely glanced up. I wondered if they were used to the sound, or if they'd trained themselves not to care, because caring too much in a city of millions is an exhausting habit. At home, I opened the model again. Changing assumptions was easy. That was the frightening part. Truth, it turns out, is sometimes held together by a few cells in a spreadsheet. I could make 12% appear without technically falsifying any historical data. It would be a projection, a best-case scenario. Asterisked, footnoted, legally defensible. I called my brother, Rui, because he was the kind of person who never let my thoughts remain abstract. He answered from his night shift at the hospital. "If they publish 12%, I said, "and it doesn't happen, what's the harm? People will be disappointed. The mayor will blame departments. Maybe they'll say the model was wrong." Rui was quiet, and I heard the muffled urgency of a corridor behind him. "Katerina, the harm is that someone will use that number as reassurance. They'll point to it when they cut something else. They'll say, "We've solved response times." They'll stop feeling the problem. His voice sharpened. And when you normalize pretending, you train everyone to accept pretending as policy. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and realized I was grieving. Not for the job, but for a version of myself I had maintained like an exhibit. In university, I had believed ethics was a fixed line. Adulthood had taught me it was more like a shoreline, slowly eroded, not by one wave, but by countless small permissions. On Monday morning, I sent 2 documents. The first was the requested forecast, with the 12% headline and the most generous assumptions I could justify. The second was a separate memo addressed to the director, copied to the city auditor, stating plainly what the 12% required and what the most likely range actually was. I wrote it in careful, neutral Portuguese. No accusations, no drama, just the kind of writing that leaves nowhere to hide. Before I could reconsider, I also scheduled a meeting with the director and asked for the memo to be attached to any public release. When Luis called me minutes later, his voice was low and controlled. "You realize what you've done?" "I've documented the conditions," I said. My mouth was dry. "If we're building a better city, we should be able to say what it costs." There was a pause long enough for my heartbeat to feel loud. "You've made this difficult," he said at last. "I know." For the rest of the day, people moved around me with exaggerated politeness, as if I were carrying something contagious. I didn't feel heroic. I felt exposed. Yet beneath the fear was an unexpected calm, the quiet that comes when you stop performing agreement. On Tuesday, the press release went out with the 12% claim. But attached, quietly, almost grudgingly, was an appendix of assumptions, and a range that included my lower estimates. No journalist would lead with that. Most people would never read it. Still, it existed. And because it existed, someone inside the system would think twice before turning a hopeful number into a blunt instrument. That night, walking along the river, I watched the lights tremble on the water and accepted that ambition is not only about climbing. Sometimes, it is about refusing to become the kind of person who can't remember where the shoreline used to be. Thank you for listening and practicing English with us. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends.